So hello, and yes, I am Michelle Maloney. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you tonight. And I've really enjoyed all the different prayers this evening. That was absolutely delightful. I always like to acknowledge Yagara and Turrbal peoples. Love the country that I live on. Those photos are the lovely water lilies from the Nudgee waterholes where I live. So I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and what I think is one of the most remarkable cultures on the planet. Their traditional ways of caring for country and caring for each other continue to inspire. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I do with a lot of Indigenous mates, looking across the kinds of governance work that we're interested in. I should also mention myself. I normally try to locate myself in my work to let you know that I'm a descendant of the Irish convicts that were carted over here unwillingly by the British Empire. I'm so glad that they were. I love being born in this place. I think I'm all of the 5th generation Australian, which is nothing compared to the 10,000 generations of Aboriginal people, or whatever it is. But yeah, I love being here, and I am an earth-centred human. Plants and animals are literally the thing that get me out of bed in the morning, not only because my old dog makes me get up and take him out, but because it is my passion for those things that makes me do the work that I do. I grew up in the middle of Queensland. When I give talks in Queensland, I always hope that people know Barcaldine. It's out near Longreach, yes. I give talks all around the world. Normally my next slide has a map of Australia, hello from here. I was born here. So I grew up out in central western Queensland, very dry place, very, very dry. It would rain one day a year and we would literally run out of the classroom and dance around in it. It was such a novelty. And that little, being a kid from the bush has always stayed with me, and it's enabled me to work in lots of places and lots of cultures around the world with great happiness, because it's the learning and the doing and the sharing that I really enjoy. So in my presentation tonight, I was actually invited to talk about earth jurisprudence, which I will, and the work of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA. So I hope that I can give justice to the remarkable work that a lot of us have been doing for 10 years as volunteers right up until the end of last year, where a philanthropic group discovered us. We felt very Hollywood because they found us, they offered a little bit of funding, and now I've got 2 paid staff part-time, which is very exciting. So I'm going to talk about the work that we do, what earth jurisprudence is, and if I have time, I would like to mention a program we work on called Green Prints, because it brings everything we do together, helping people do place-based responses to a lot of the big picture and the small detail work that we're involved in. But we'll see how we go for time. So of course our starting point is the ecological crisis. I'm sure 10 years ago when we started talking about earth-centred systems change, I do feel like a lot of the work we did was literally wheeling out slides to remind people how much damage had been done over the last 400 or 500 years, particularly since European colonisation and large-scale extractivism since the Second World War. But today, most people know that we're facing down some pretty severe problems on the planet. The extractivism and resulting pollution from taking fossil fuels out of the earth has caused a changing climate that we're now dealing with. And even back in the days when I was a young'un, in my 20s, when I worked in the first climate change agency in Australia in 1995, there seemed to be so much time to get things done. And then the political processes interfered. We had a lot of changes in the late 90s with corporate misinformation, and many of the decades of time that we had to make the change has been lost. So for anyone like me who's been working in this space for quite a while, it's a time of deep reflection, a lot of grief, a lot of sadness. We're losing things that we should never have lost: ecosystems, places, seasons, plants, animals. However, there's also a huge cause for optimism, because in the last 5 to 8 years, I've seen a remarkable shift and a hunger amongst more people than ever before for deep systems change. And that's what helps me get out of bed in the morning as well. So climate change, biodiversity loss, endless degradation of very important ecosystems, a general loss of the wild, a massive increase in human populations. Some people are saying that we're now entering a new geological epoch. We've moved out of the beautiful Holocene for the last 10,000 years, making life safe and easy, relatively, into the Anthropocene, where human beings are not just a dominant force, but one of the core forces of change on the planet. So that's the world we live in. These are the things we're facing. And how can we understand the ecological crisis? When I give my longer talks, I wheel out some slides that are hugely depressing, some of which have been created by the wonderful, amazing Professor Will Steffen, our very own Aussie, who's played a huge part in the Climate Council and in the concept of planetary boundaries. And those slides show, after the 1950s, this massive escalation, this perfect storm of technological capacity, pulling resources out of this planet even faster than before. But I didn't want to dwell too much on that tonight, so I'm not going to run you through the depressing stuff and then cheer you up. I'm just going to keep you cheery. But how can we understand the crisis? I'm going to talk about Earth jurisprudence because it's a really interesting framework that has helped us build a sort of coherent way of looking at some of the problems that have been caused by some of the human activities that have taken too much of nature and produced an awful lot of pollution in its place. So Earth jurisprudence, it's a big flash word. Don't blame me. Thomas Berry created this phrase. But really it's a philosophy that says perhaps human beings have reached a point where, regardless of your religious background, your cosmology, your belief system, perhaps we've reached a time where we can look across all of our systems and say we're all earthlings and we need to live our lives day by day, big picture and small picture, in accordance with really the rules of the living world, the natural systems that support us. So we say earth laws, and it's not just about law, it's also about all of those governance systems that we live and work and play together, which I'll talk more about. And just a reminder, Earth jurisprudence or Earth laws is not about taking humans out of the picture. It's not about a radical take on eliminating us from all the good things that we do. It's just asking us to re-examine our place on this planet and within this wider connected community of life. And Thomas Berry's work, basically he's calling for us to shift the governance systems that have emerged, and I can particularly point to my own cultural background. I don't speak for anyone else, but in terms of coming from the English-Irish side, and I'm sure there's some Brits in the background there, the cultural views that emerged over several thousands of years, but would particularly have become dominant since European colonisation in the 1600s and onwards. It's those views that have been extremely human-centred. And so when Thomas Berry did his analysis of how to critique some of these things, which I'll explain, he talks really simply about shifting from this human-centred worldview to really seeing ourselves as just one of many living organisms on the planet. And so the human-centred view you can see there is represented by a hierarchical world where people think they're at the top of the perch and that everything else is lesser than us. Whereas an earth-centred worldview says whether you believe in a creator or evolution, we're all interconnected on this planet. And if we take out enough of the soils and the plants and the creatures, we'll also take out ourselves. So there's this, not just a human need, but a human love of the flourishing world. So there's Thomas Berry. Who's heard of Thomas Berry? Anyone? A couple? Oh, that's interesting. Thomas Berry he started his life as a Catholic priest, but then he left the organised religion and then spent many decades looking across different worldviews and cosmologies. And some people call him a deep ecologist. He called himself a geologian. He was fascinated not just by the story of Earth, but the story of the cosmos. And a lot of his work, including a beautiful book with Brian Swim, which I can't remember the title of because I'm way too tired, think about the unfolding of the cosmos, but they look at the universe story. And not only do we place humanity inside the web of life here on this planet, but we place this planet within the bigger picture of the universe. And there's a whole bunch of wonderful deep ecology practices like the journey of the Earth and the universe story, where you actually walk the lifetime of the planet and of the cosmos. And it's very humbling to think of yourself in that bigger picture. So Thomas Berry wrote a lot. He's written heaps of books. A lot of them were focusing on how we rethink our relationship with the living world. But this is the one that directly inspired some of the work that we do inside AELA. The great work, Our Way into the Future, as I've already kind of hinted at, in this book, he critiqued these underpinning governing structures of the Western industrialised world. I think the industrialised world more generally now. And he looked at law and government, economics, universities and education, and religion. And he said that a lot of these systems that have been built really revere the human being at the cost of destroying the rest of the living world. And he could break that right down. That book is quite A disturbing but very beautiful read. If you ever want a sort of a simple system for thinking about what human beings have been up to, it's actually a really good read. He writes beautifully. Anthropocentrism, human-centeredness. What does it really mean? Well, it's not just the idea that we should build the world to support us. Anthropocentrism is a very deep, ingrained idea in many cultures. And Thomas Berry talks about it as a mode of consciousness that has established a radical discontinuity between the human and the other modes of being. And some have described it as a mental illness, to actually think we're separate from the living world. But its key elements are that human beings are simply the central fact of the universe, that it's all about us, and everything else is just there for us to use. And I can't think of a better way to describe anthropocentrism, the idea that everything else is out there for us. Whereas an earth-centered worldview, and I'm looking at Linda because I'm sure the pagans would agree with this, recognises us as just one of many beautiful living beings, and we're beautiful too. And if you think that way, and certainly the work I do with Indigenous cultures around the world, those cultures who think that way really see the world very differently, and their expectations of what they can take, their expectations of what they can use, their ideas about rights and obligations are very different to those that we hold inside my Western legal tradition or Western cultural tradition. So it's those ideas from Thomas Berry that sparked an interest in me, a big nerdy lawyer, who'd left the legal profession years before to work with Indigenous friends on what I thought was far more important work around community development, to actually rethink the role of how we think about the work that we do. So this lovely little tree shows that our inspiration certainly was triggered in some ways by earth jurisprudence, but had already been informed, in my case, by many years working with Indigenous friends, and really just falling in love with their worldview and the ways that they see the world. It made a lot more sense to me to think of a possum or a bat or the trees and the gum trees and the insects and the bugs as relatives and friends, rather than just things to kill and destroy, eat. Occasionally we eat them. So the relationist ethos and what they call Indigenous first laws, the law is from the land, all of these ideas have informed the work that we do. So when we pay homage or pay our respects to Indigenous worldviews, it's not just lip service, it's something that we believe very deeply in. Who's seen this map before? Good. The numbers are changing. 10 years ago, hardly anyone had seen it. Isn't that strange? This is, as my Indigenous friends say, still a Western-style map, but it's a good one because it shows the many hundreds of language groups and places that people did have and continue to have post-colonisation. And this in itself, if anyone's fascinated by Indigenous culture, I strongly recommend you connect with an organisation that myself and some Indigenous friends created, Future Dreaming Australia, where people like Mary Graham, who's a Kombu Mary elder and a remarkable philosopher and an adjunct professor at UQ, can talk about the details of the governance systems of pan-Aboriginal culture. So all those things are inspiring to us and interesting. But I can see some folks are fading, a few have already nodded off, so let me get some interaction going. Have a think and then call out, what is governance? Such a boring word. I think it's delightful, it means everything to me. But what is governance, human governance? Thoughts? Yes? Stewardship, cool. What else? Care. What else?
Leadership of others.
Leadership of others? Yes?
With
I was waiting for that. I was picking up. What else is governance? What's it mean? Well, let me throw a little question at you to think about it another way. If it's Friday night in your house and you're sitting there with your friends or your family and you all had a lovely feed of pizza and there's one piece of pizza left, who gets it?
It's collaboration, sharing.
Sharing with who?
With those with whom you are enjoying the meal.
So you might chop it up if there's 5 of you and cut it up 5 ways?
Maybe.
But how else might you do it? What would you do with that last piece of pizza? All ideas are welcome.
The father will eat it.
Sorry? The father will eat it. We get that one a lot. Thank you for being honest. What else? Come on, seriously, this is very important. Auction? Oh, that's awesome. I haven't heard of that one before. That's great. The youngest one. Why would the youngest get it?
They don't have as much patience of the adult.
I love it. What else? I've heard everything except the auction before, but what else? Whoever can grab it? I hear that one at schools when I give these talks. Whoever can get it and run the fastest. In North Queensland, a group of teachers, one of the blokes called out, we'll fight for it. I said, thank you, North Queensland. I haven't heard that one before. But seriously, what else? Can you think in your own home? Sorry?
Discussion, consultation.
Can I have a consultation about who's hungriest? Who wants it? Yeah? What else? There's lots. Bargaining. Ah. And maybe even, a bit of swapping time for that last bit of pizza. I'll do the dishes. Yeah, he'll do the washing up. Yeah. Anything else? Sorry? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The naughty one.
The naughty one. Oh, that would have to be back to our colleague who said the one who could take it and run off. Yeah. But let's just think for a moment. When you're in your household or with your friends and you've got that one last piece of pizza, all of your value systems come to the front. Because if a father takes it, you might be in a patriarchal family. If the mother gets it, you might be in a matriarchal family. If everybody gets an equal share, you might be socialists. Yay! In another group of school students, one of the boys said, whoever pays for it. I said, the capitalist model. Whoever paid for the pizza owns it and he should get the last piece. That was a group of teenagers. And the only reason I mention the pizza example is because most people can relate to it, and it shows us that governance is the stuff that happens between us all the time. And the values and what we think is fair guides those decisions. I've had other communities or other people in communities say, well, you'd save it. You'd save it for the next day for lunch. It's a conservation value. Other people would say, the loudest, the hungriest, the oldest. And all of these things matter. And the reason I give that silly example is governance is important because it's the invisible underpinning glue that holds us together. It's really how human beings organise themselves to live, work and play. It can be rules, it can be based on the values, but it actually helps us allocate resources, support each other or not support each other. And all of this stuff is the stuff that we're interested in because how human beings view themselves, view fairness and equity, and view the living world shapes how we design our societies. We are literally unpicking the fabric of how we live and what our civilization is all about. So what we tell everyone is a reminder that governance happens everywhere. It's a little bit like air and oxygen. It's everywhere all the time. It's women in the tuck shop. It's, men in the tuck shop. It's people in a sports group. It's folks thinking they're important in a big level bank. And when corruption and when unfair values enter, whether it's politics, your corporate structures, or your tuck shop, or your family, those governance structures start to be skewed. And what we like to remind people is that when we think about human beings and how we work and live and play together, are we just thinking about humans or are we factoring in other life forms around us? Because that's when the rubber hits the road or the solar panel hits the roof, when we think about our future as a species on this planet. We have to change the things that we're doing. And one way to do that is the work that we've been looking at, and it's only because we're nerds and we love the governance stuff, to unpick some of those really unfair structures and reform them. So that not just us, not just humans, but we need it too, we need our social justice, but all of life on Earth has some room to live. So that's a bit of theory. Now, if we think about Earth jurisprudence as a framework for action, or I can rewrite this whole talk and talk about the relationist ethos, which is what Mary Graham and Indigenous friends talk about. The relationist ethos, we are always in relationship with each other. And if you expand your community from human beings into other plants and animals, then suddenly that image of human-centred and earth-centred takes on a lot more meaning. The decisions we make, whether it's through spirituality, through love, through just practicalities and efficiency of looking after resources, if we factor in the plants and the animals and the things that we do, our decisions and our governance systems change. When I say we, I mean industrialised societies. So, very quickly, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, we're 10 years old this year. As I say, we were triggered by a shared interest when a bunch of us met at a conference, a shared interest in Thomas Berry's work, but it soon expanded into much more. We see our mission as trying to increase the understanding and practical implementation of earth-centred governance, predominantly here in Australia, but we also are connected to lots of lovely international friends. And we work across what Westerners would call a discipline, because when you think about it, law, economics, these are all just things that we've made up. They're all social constructs. Law is different from place to place. And our vision centres on transforming the stuff that we do so that not only we have a future, but other life on Earth. We're very interested in culture and eco-spirituality because we feel that when people are empowered with love, it's the strongest force on earth. And if people care a little bit, that's good too. But those who love the living world are leading the way in trying to find solutions to some of the things we've been doing. I won't go into the rest of it. We've got a gazillion different bits and pieces of our work, but we're very interested in how we can shift cultures from being human-centred to earth-centred. And just very quickly, I want to give you some examples about how we bring that into law and government, economics and education. So with law, has anyone heard of the rights of nature as a concept? Yeah. In a longer talk, I can sort of bore you senseless about the origins of it and what it really means. But in a nutshell, think of it this way. If you were to put a pair of glasses on, probably a brown pair of glasses, and they were to show you the world, the way the Western legal system sees the world, you would probably only see people and weird blobby things like corporations. Because the Western legal system was designed many, many, many hundreds of years ago based on something much older than that, to give rights to human beings. That's how they saw the world. And then, particularly linked to colonisation yet again, the early corporations said, we want 20 people, that's actually not me, hurrah. We want 20 people to get our money together and get in a boat and tootle off to somewhere else and take everything they have. That's colonisation, that's the beginning of early capitalism. But what that meant was a legal system emerged, developed and grew that only saw rights of people. So the English legal system that came to Australia in 1788, many, many core elements of that have not changed, and I find that astonishingly depressing. It's very medieval. If you commit a crime, you're still taken to court. The Crown versus Michelle Maloney. The Crown. How medieval is that? But our legal system in Australia today still sees the living world as the property of human beings. It could be a national park, that property we've chosen to protect. But it could be a cow, property we own and decided to eat. Or it could be a koala, something else entirely, a wild animal that we may or may not decide to protect. So our legal system is built on human-centredness. First laws and First Nations legal systems are very, very different. Westerners and colonisation has disrespected Indigenous law, refers to it as customary law or myths and stories, not true. What I like to remind people with, if they do fall asleep while I'm talking, imagine the world in 1400. Before European colonisation, the whole planet was covered in different people, in different cultures, in different places, and their own legal systems. And it's only Western colonisation that started to sort of relegate all these other legal systems and peoples to something lesser. Now, when I'm not in a multi-faith group, I really do harp on about what Christianity has done with its views of people who are not Christians, but I shan't do that because I have deep respect for all faiths and systems. But it has played a huge part in the colonisation of this place and many other places that were colonised by Christian faith believers. Just read the little cartoon. I think that's a nice one about, it says here, is the species that attacked you in the courtroom now? And can you identify it? Poor old planet Earth. I have a slide there where I ramble on about the history of Western law, but I won't do that to you tonight. I do that to students. So I've already spoken to this, but there are some really weird examples in our legal system about how human-centred we are and what we do to the rest of the living world. So we see human laws as the highest authority in the industrialised West. We do not defer to any kind of God in our legal system. We only since the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, we only look to ourselves as the source of all knowledge, excluding completely the truths that come from our living world. And Westerners pride themselves on universalism, the universal rights of human beings, etc. But what it's done is extinguish the uniqueness of place. And the importance for environmentalism is understanding the living world and building laws around our culture and our ways of doing that fit into that place. I won't go through the rest of that slide. The rights of nature is a really interesting and has become very powerful in the last 10 years. It's the most exciting, fast-moving area of law that I've seen. And if anyone's interested, on our website and in many other places, you'll find lots of lovely updates about more than 15 jurisdictions around the world have explored. By recognising the rights of nature, they're directly challenging the idea that I just talked to you about, that nature is just property. So recognising that nature could have its own rights to exist is trying to challenge the idea that it's just belonging to humans. It in itself is a very complex area, and very happy to chat to anyone who's interested. Excuse me. I'm surrounded by sick people at home, so I'm really hoping I'm not getting sick. I won't speak too quickly now. I've only got a few minutes left, but I will speak quickly. I won't speak too much longer. We also look at economics, because economics is for some people the church of the modern day, church of the latter day capitalists, perhaps. And the ideas that came from Western expansionism, colonialism, and imperialism were all about how can we take and use resources, turn them into human productivity, and certain people, not everyone, can profit. So since the 1970s, the foundation of capitalism, the idea of endless growth, has been challenged by many, many people, trying to say, if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to end up wrecking the joint. And in the 1970s, the Club of Rome predicted 5 different scenarios of what could happen to planet Earth if we keep extracting the way we did. And I'm really sad to say that the worst case scenario they predicted is absolutely spot on. Very sad. So growth economics has been identified as a serious problem by lots of people for a long time. And so the alternatives to that have also been bubbling up since the 1970s with steady state economics and ecological economics. And interestingly, back 6 years ago when AELA, my organisation, which was primarily looking at law and governance and regulation, started looking around for a cousin organisation, a cousin not-for-profit that might be interested in changing the economic system towards an earth-centred way of being, there wasn't really a group in civil society. So a bunch of us ended up accidentally making one. And today, the New Economy Network Australia has many thousands of people connected to it, many hundreds of members of this co-op. And it's connected to ideas around donut economics, wellbeing economics. For anyone who's never heard of anything I'm talking about before, perhaps just go away knowing that rights of nature is on the up and up. People are more interested in Indigenous knowledge and systems than ever before. And wellbeing economics is starting to step forward as a really interesting challenge to capitalism. It's the first big structure that I've seen in a long time that says, we get that capitalism is clever and it keeps changing form every time people try to challenge it. But maybe if we cut off the harsh edges and start to look at different indicators and different ways of measuring what is a happy, healthy society, what does well-being look like for people and planet, and it's starting to emerge as a bit of a movement globally. That's the Australian Earth Laws Alliance version of the donut, because it's full of animals. Theirs is called a safe operating space for humanity, and ours is called a living space for the whole Earth community. Education is similarly, like our legal and economic system, really pointed towards churning out people who become part of the industrial machine. Our education system is really causing some serious health harm to our children. I have a teenager who is rejecting the current education system because it is so competitive, so inhumane, and its lack of connection to the things many children are interested in. I feel like I'm now becoming the living proof of a mother struggling with a child who really is getting nothing out of formal education. And when we hear about the endless mantra, jobs and growth, and you look at the origins of current education systems that emerged after the Industrial Revolution to churn people into places and clock them in for the day, churn them back out so they can go into a factory. That's a bit of a brutal simplification. But thinking about what we're teaching, but also thinking about how we are teaching our children. And again, when we look to other cultures, they didn't jam their kids into a room 5 days a week and tell them to sit still. They took them with them when they were doing stuff, hunting, fishing, making stuff, whatever. And I do feel that COVID triggered a very interesting phase for people to be rethinking some of these systems. Or it could just be because I'm a cranky mum trying to survive crazy times that education has become a big focus. And I'm going to sort of wrap up, and I'm just going to touch on green prints. If any of you are still awake and you're interested in some of the work we do, I strongly suggest you have a little peek at our Green Prints website. What we've done is design a stepwise way for community groups to work together to do a number of things that challenge all the stuff I just spoke about, and to really focus on their local place and to actually look at what's there, to build local, bioregional and catchment knowledge into systems, but also really work together to push back at the kinds of external forces like faraway governments, faraway and invading corporations, and try to think about how they can change governance both locally and more long-term. And so the work we're doing in that program is both gentle and exciting and fun, and it weaves together getting to know place, rethinking human activities in a place, understanding the history, but it can also be used for a very radical way of educating people about how the systems have been born in Australia since 1788, what they've done, and what will continue to happen if we keep using them. We do all these scenarios to show, you know what, if we keep building all this residential development on the sunny coast, if we keep doing for the next 10 years what we've done for the last 10 years, what's going to be left? Lots of people in very badly designed houses, not much else. So anyway, that's Green Prints, and I'm just going to leave it there on a pretty picture. But yeah, thank you very much.